submitted to full respect of fundamental rights. Another case, the Vidal-Hall versus Google case, is very important because in this decision there is a reinterpretation and a widening of the idea and the category of personal data, expanding the protection of personal data and of privacy beyond the traditional binders. And at the same time, this decision of the United Kingdom Court of Appeal says that gives a new definition of damages. So, giving more room to the protection of the individuals. And if we look to the British Columbia decision on Google and the right to be forgotten, there is explicitly said that the case can have an effect not just within provincial borders, but globally. What is happening? That local decisions, one state, the European Union, have an ultra activity. They are shaping, generally speaking, the world of internet. Look at that from the point of view of the fundamental rights. But I must say, I am obviously in favor of this wave, of these dynamics, but I am at the same time convinced that judicial activism cannot be the sole countermeasure for controlling powers that try to govern internet without any control. It means that we must follow this initiative, the result of the so-called global dialogue between courts, must be accompanied by a global dialogue promoted by the public bodies. Because in this very moment, we must say that the promise of respecting privacy and freedom of expression by the biggest tech companies, this promise has not been respected. And a very recent research of New America Foundation published some days ago indicates a survey demonstrating how they are failing grade on data privacy rights. So we cannot make reference only to the judge in a positive way, and we cannot make reference to self-regulation looking at what is in fact happening in the world of the over-the-top. A global dialogue promoted also by influential and institutionally grounded Internet Bill of Rights is essential for making possible global commons rules on privacy, but more generally for safeguarding the democratic and ever-generative vision of Internet. It is not a simple multi-stakeholder approach. It's a new constitutional perspective, innovating the same traditional procedure of the modern constitutionalism. An international treaty must be obviously looked at as the final objective, but waiting for it, we cannot lose the opportunity of an Internet Bill of Rights piece by piece, reinforcing day by day the protection on fundamental rights and the same democracy. We can say that we are facing now an infinite constitutionalism. It's for that we decide to present here in a global and participatory arena the Italian Declaration as a step on a long and difficult way. Long and difficult because we are in a battlefield and conflicts are very hard. An arena, the Internet Governance Forum, where it's present an essential actor, the United Nations, where I hope, and the aim of the Italian document passed unanimously by the Chamber is where I hope a specific debate can happen as soon as possible. Thank you.
So thank you, Professor Hodota. It's always a pleasure to hear your comments and your thoughts on the issue of the Internet Bill of Rights. It's always thought-provoking. With that, I pass the floor to four of our discussants who will reflect upon the remarks made by Professor Hodota, and I will begin with Nena Nawakama, so from the Web Foundation. So Nena, if you want to take the floor.
Grazie, Senor Professor. Thank you so very much for the work you've done, because it makes my own work easier. So thank you very much. You have helped me, and I want to extend these thanks to the government, the deputies and the people of Italy, and to Brazil also. The first remark I want to make here is that Italy is not just first in Pisa and in handsome men, but now you can be first in the Internet Bill of Rights in Europe, and we want to say thank you. And I'm happy that we are here in Brazil at this panel organized by Brazil and Italy, countries that we consider pioneers in Internet rights. My boss, Tim Berners-Lee, really wanted to be here because the Fed, it's been 1 week now that the Internet Bill of Rights was adopted in Italy. We had a mini party at the Web Foundation, and I went out and I had a nice pizza in Italian colors to my own self, because that was something monumental for those of us who work on freedom online. And he wants me to convey the gratitude of the whole of the foundation to the people of Italy, and then to also give you some bad messages, which means that now that you are number one, you can no longer be number two anymore. You have to keep up that work. You don't just have to vote the rights, we have to implement them. And we don't just have to implement them in Italy, but we are counting on you, we are counting on Brazil to take the rights wagon around the whole world. There are other countries that have started similar initiatives. Nigeria is one of them, Philippines, I believe, and we will be looking up to Italy to get some help in process. I know that France has already started. France is at consultation stage. So we are looking up to pioneer countries, not just to implement and uphold, but also to serve as support to other countries that will engage in this. Tim Berners-Lee has convened a globally acknowledged team of experts, and they have started work, not for one country, but as you have said, for a global Bill of Rights. I don't know what the name will be. It will be for all of us to decide. Maybe we should just go with the Italian Magna Carta. I don't know. Maybe it will be something in English, maybe it will be something that we can adapt the name, but it is still in a draft. The Italian Bill of Rights has 13 articles. What I can assure you is that the Global Bill of Rights will not go beyond that. It will be a simple set of rights that we would want to accord to each other as we go along as web citizens. Now, one point I would like to make following the step in Italy is to ask us the questions, like the message we got from the president of the Chamber of Deputies. This in Italy was driven by the Chamber of Deputies, which means that you could be sure it will succeed. Now, in other countries, the question we have to ask ourselves is, who is doing what? Who wants to engage in this? How can we get all stakeholders to understand that this is very important as we move forward? Internet rights, digital rights, the Internet Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta, the Web Charter, whatever name we want to give it, is an idea whose time has come. It has started in Brazil, it started in Italy, it has started in some other countries. It will not go back. So the question to us will be, how do we want to drive this going forward? How do we want to drive it across the world? How do we want to push it further? Adoption is one thing, but implementation is another. I am from the civil society, and some of us who know me know the way I introduce myself. I'm Nena from the internet. So we are making rights for people like myself and most of all the young people who are coming up today. This is very critical because going forward, the internet becomes our utmost tool for development. As we step into the sustainable development goals, the role of technology becomes bigger than it was when we were talking about Millennium Development Goals. So the question I want to leave with everyone here is, what will be your own role? What will be your role in proposing these rights where they do not exist? What will be your role in promoting them when they come in as a bill? What will be your role in adopting them when they show up in our parliament, in our Chamber of Deputies, or in our national assemblies? What role will we play after the adoption? Because adoption is one thing, but seeing it implemented in the life of every Italian, and the life of every European, and the life of every African, Brazilian, the life of every human being, it's even the bigger call. So we need to get all stakeholders on board. And I have been asked, I haven't been to a place called Sicily in Italy. I hear it's a very beautiful place, and I've been asked if Sicily can host the charter for the world, and if Italy can provide a home, can host these people who are drafting this charter, so we can get more inspiration from the Italian people and take this work forward. So those are my questions. I don't have many of the responses. I only bring questions. Thank you, Italy, but then the work only just begins.
Thanks for the comments, Nana. With that, I'll pass the floor to Madjad Shak, member of the European Parliament. So, Madjad.
Try. Oh, it just came up. Thanks. Thank you very much to Brazil, everybody here who's been part of making this massive operation work and kick off. And thanks to the ITS, the Italian Chamber, and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, particularly for hosting this session. I'm really happy to be a part of it. I was just listening to Nenda and recalling how the last time I heard you, it was in The Hague at the Global Cybersecurity Conference, and she made a room full of thousands of officials scream or sort of chant, all of the people, all of the internet, all of the time. Yeah. And so I know that's not necessary in this room, but it was just great to see, ministers and everybody sharing this vision, and I hope we can get further with that goal here at the IGF in Brazil. For those of you who don't know me, I've been serving in the European Parliament with a Dutch progressive liberal party called D66 since 2009. We're part of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe in the European Parliament. My work focuses on trade, foreign policy, human rights, but I've also founded the intergroup for the digital agenda, which is a cross-party, cross-nationality group of about 80 parliamentarians in the European Parliament and counting. And besides my work in the European Parliament, I serve on the Global Commission for Internet Governance. So that gives you a bit of an idea. I've been very inspired by what the Italians and the Brazilians and some others across the world are accomplishing in crowdsourced initiatives for bills of rights, which are then adopted by parliaments. I'm also a little bit jealous, I should say, also because the European Parliament doesn't have the right of initiative, so we cannot push a law in the same way that national parliaments can. Maybe something to keep in mind as well, because I think generally in the European Parliament there is a broad base of support for a Bill of Rights in the digital era, safeguarding individuals' rights. So maybe we can kickstart a new initiative. I would be happy to work with anyone interested in this room and further, but I'm definitely also here to learn, to take note of the details with which these great results have been accomplished. So what I thought I would do, since I don't have a Bill of Rights to claim myself, is to share observations about the context and the sort of broader developments that I see and I think are important for this kind of discussion, and the whole question about how technology upsets or changes the relationship between governments, citizens, and companies globally. Given the fact that it adds a layer to almost all aspects of life, connecting people and machines almost everywhere in the world, we are now facing a hyper-connected reality, a sort of digital ecosystem that stresses across the world. And this has de facto challenged the role of governments in probably one of the most unprecedented ways. Governments and lawmaking is very much tied through legitimacy and jurisdiction to the nation state and territoriality. And this is, of course, in direct contrast with this hyper-connected reality. Citizenship is also very much tied to a nation, traditionally speaking, while people and their data and information move through multiple jurisdictions as soon as they start sending emails or browsing the internet. And while technology has changed a lot in the lives of people and has brought an even greater promise of what good it can do for the public interest, we have to look at how we want to make sure that principles that, at least in Europe and in most democratic societies, people agree remain unchanged, can be safeguarded. Fundamental rights and freedoms, of course, being key also as part of this discussion, but I'm also thinking about accountability, transparency, fair competition, and also security. When we talk about rights and freedoms, too often, unfortunately, the efforts made to increase security of digital infrastructure or national security go at the expense of people's fundamental rights and freedoms. But I think particularly online, this does not have to be the case, and we have to be very careful about that, and at the same time acknowledge that ensuring security is a principal responsibility of any government. So given this hyper-connected reality and the interdependence that it brings along, we have to increasingly look at international efforts to solidify principles and rights in binding or non-binding norms. And I think the leadership shown by Italy, Brazil, and other countries are very important steps that can help pave the way for broader support internationally. At the same time, there are other governments or other actors, let's say, that are operating in this space and seeking to enshrine norms of their own. We may well be among, like-mindeds in this room, but there are also governments that are seeking to use new technologies and the internet to really reclaim and even strengthen their top-down control over people. So what we have to do is, besides looking at what new initiatives such as Bills of Rights can do, I think we have to look at what existing laws can mean in ensuring that they cover the digital space, and of course where new laws are needed, that we incorporate the aspect that technology brings to almost every part of life on board in an appropriate way. But it has to begin, and I say this also while contrasting Bills of Rights to more authoritarian top-down governance using technologies, that democracies all over the world have to give meaning to democratic principles. And I'm really afraid that using secret laws or not respecting the Constitution or not practicing what is preached have undermined the credibility and the ability to lead on the part of democratic governments all over the world. And I say this with pain in my heart, and I hope that while we discuss Bill of Rights, we also look at what it really means to stand for democratic principles and to wish them to apply universally. In European Parliament, we have, I think, broad consensus behind a lot of the goals that are reflected in the Bill of Rights, or the principles that are reflected there. The Parliament has pushed for stronger privacy protection, data protection, but also net neutrality and oversight of intelligence gathering. This has often been in a sort of clash with national governments of EU member states, who tend to prioritize national security, for example, or who look at perceived national interests instead of a broader international effort and international interdependent reality. And as parliamentarians, we, I believe, generally have the position of individuals, of citizens, and the public interest at heart, and that puts us in a greater position to take leadership. I think it is essential that the public interest and the rights and freedoms of individuals, citizens all over the world, are protected against overreach by governments, their abuse of power, which we've heard a few examples about, context of intelligence gathering, or overreaching when it comes to claims of national or cyber security. But there's another vacuum, and that is the vacuum that the lack of laws or lack of application of laws leaves for big corporations and companies to fill. I've often referred to them as the new sovereigns, and I don't think that that is a desirable position for them to be in. We see that the internet's critical infrastructure and most of its services are all organized, run, and developed by private companies. And at the same time, governments depend on them for these vital functions, such as providing security or access to information, or safeguarding rights and freedoms. We even see that companies are now often determining whether or not speech is appropriate or which content should be accessible or not. And again, I think this is undesirable. It is companies that are now setting the norms, perhaps not by law, but de facto. And while incorporating so many users in specific services, this has a real impact. And who are the people deciding whether or not breastfeeding is appropriate to watch, or whether or not there's too much nudity in a particular picture, according to which norms, according to which checks and balances this is happening. Effectively, it's happening in new style sweatshops, where in low-wage countries, laborers are looking at these kinds of pictures on a daily basis, completely detached from the context and the laws of the country in which the internet user may access this information. So this is a problem. Okay, I want to conclude because I think the discussion will be much more interesting, but to ensure that the public interest is safeguarded in a broader sense, we should not only look at the relationship between the individual and the government, which is what a Bill of Rights seeks to do, but also look at how we want to ensure that companies are not abusing their position or power while this is growing, particularly online. And so I consider these discussions about Bill of Rights or Magna Carta in a broader context, and I think it requires an almost fundamental or philosophical discussion about what it means to seek universal values that apply to everyone. And what leadership democratic societies and democratic governments, democratically elected parliamentarians, civil society can take in this, and how we can ensure that the autonomous rights of individuals, which are sought in the Bill of Rights, can apply globally. I think this is the key opportunity that has not been harnessed yet when it comes to the hyper-connected reality of the internet, to make sure that people, even when they suffer from repression at the hands of their governments, can experience these universal rights through the use of the open internet. And in concluding, in order to make these processes of drafting laws, updating laws, or initiating bills of rights for the internet, it is essential that there's more knowledge sharing about how technology works, about how lawmaking works, about how politics works. In the tech community, it is quite in vogue to suggest that politicians know nothing about technology. And I can attest that probably a lot of them don't know the difference between a server and a waiter. But at the same time, I don't know how many people in the tech community know how laws are being made, and that is equally important. So instead of suggesting that the other side is not as smart as they should be, perhaps let's work on how we can improve the exchange of knowledge and information in light of these shared goals. So I'll end with that, and I want to thank you again for this wonderful opportunity and this interesting panel.
Thank you very much, Mariette, for your remarks. And with that, I would pass the floor to Urs Gasser from the Berkman Center for Internet and Society. So, Urs, please.
Yes, now it works. Excellent. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. We at the Berkman Center, we had the great pleasure and honor to support the Italian initiative by way of doing some background research. Actually, as Professor Odetta mentioned, there are over 80 initiatives underway or have emerged over the past few years that focus on something like a creation of a Bill of Rights for the internet age, and we have been collecting these efforts and tried to analyze some of these efforts. So I thought I would share with you from such a more research or academic perspective a few quick observations and then end with a number of open questions for discussion. So what we did is we focused on, out of these 80 plus initiatives, on 30 initiatives spanning from the late 1990s to 2015. And I would agree that looking and analyzing these initiatives, we see something like the early stages of a possible digital constitutionalism movement emerging. By the way, we are releasing a paper this week that maps out the different initiatives, but also gives a spreadsheet that actually includes all the initiatives and some of its content, so that other researchers can build on top of our work. Now, as one would expect, when you compare the 30 initiatives, they are quite nuanced and diverse in terms of the content, the political communities they seek to address, and also have varying degrees of aspiration regarding the formal recognition of the various efforts. But despite all these differences, we see actually a number of commonalities, or we can at least share a number of observations distilled from the various efforts. And I would only like to highlight three here. The first one on substance. It's actually quite remarkable that across the 30 initiatives we analyzed, there is a core normative set of principles emerging. We grouped them in 7 different categories, ranging from basic rights and freedoms to process requirements and aspirations. So there is a certain trend towards convergence, what is written into these initiatives. It's important to understand that in addition to relatively comprehensive, and we only looked at relative comprehensive Bill of Rights or proposals for Bill of Rights, there are additional narrowly focused and more specific initiatives. I just want to mention, for instance, the Bill of Privacy Rights for Social Networks as an example, where the scope is not the entire internet, but specific applications. I think that's very interesting because sometimes the targets of these initiatives are very specific, in this case, platform providers, which obviously is a variation on the theme that the previous panelists introduced, that this is not only about controlling or limiting the power of governments, but very much also looking at private actors and their power. In terms of frequency, the top three rights that emerge from the 30 initiatives is freedom of expression, one, second, privacy, and third, the right to access to the internet. These are the top three rights and principles that are expanded and included in all of these documents we looked at. In terms of substance, the last point I want to make is we expected that the initiatives would show some sort of a relatively close interaction with whatever the political issue of the day is. So obviously what we are all focused on in a given year at a given moment changes and evolves as the internet itself, of course, evolves. But we haven't seen this very close correlation between what is on the agenda of things like the IGF and what's then written into the Bill of Rights drafts, with two big exceptions. One, mass surveillance. Clearly, the Snowden revelations were a game changer, and the initiatives thereafter very much started to discuss or highlight the problem of mass surveillance. And net neutrality is another policy area that made it into Bill of Rights drafts more prominently in the recent past, linked to the political discussions, particularly in or starting in the US, but then spreading more globally. The second set of observations is quickly on actors and form of the documents. So we've heard from Professor Rodota that many of the initial documents are aspirational, and that's what we've observed. So 2/3 of the document can be characterized as advocacy statements seeking to influence policy making or legislation, and civil society actors have been very heavily involved in driving these efforts. Recently, however, and obviously the Italian example and also the Brazilian example are at the forefront of this trend, if it is one. Recent initiatives show a trajectory from more informal, non-binding and aspirational initiatives towards more concrete and also more detailed proposals that aim for legal binding arrangements. So corresponding with that rough trend, we also see actually an interesting mix now emerging from non-binding proposals that were initially, and that's kind of I believe an interesting phase, that were initially more global in scope, towards now another generation of proposals that are more formal, that come at the state level, again Italy and Brazil, but also Philippines as examples, and seek for state level enactment. One way to read that, so from non-binding and global initiatives towards more regional and national initiatives, may also may be to see it as evolving way in how we perceive power struggles and where the targets of opportunity are. The last point with respect to actors and form is that while we have largely discussed today European examples, and we'll turn certainly to the Brazilian example in great depth in a moment, it's important to acknowledge this has been a truly global conversation at this stage. So the African Internet Governance Forum, I would like to highlight with the African Declaration on Internet Rights and Freedoms. So you see similar conversations, not only in Europe, Latin America, but really around the world, increasingly so, which is, I believe, another strong indicator that we may be in this early stage of a global digital constitutionalism, despite all the hard work that still needs to be done, to be sure. Last set of comments briefly on process. We've heard it before from the beginning. These Bill of Rights or drafts initiatives are not only innovative in terms of the substance they deal with, but also in terms of the process that lead to such norms. And indeed, the majority of documents we've reviewed are a result of some larger forms, more expansive forms of multi-stakeholder processes. The Net Mundial statement is one example. Of course, Marco Civil, another one, and I'm sure Ronaldo will share more about that. My Digital Rights Project by the British Library is on the very end of a crowdsourced approach of drafting, and you have lots of mechanisms in between. But Professor Rodota, I'm very actually encouraged to see these kind of bottom-up processes leading us to perhaps a core set of norms that then indeed can be captured by more formal constitutional mechanisms and fora. I'd like to end with open questions, as I said. While all this is encouraging and quite wonderful, I do believe there are not only pragmatic questions, operational questions that need to be resolved, and of course a lot of hard work needs to be done on the ground, but truly some puzzles. So for instance, looking at these various initiatives, it's still not clear to me as a lawyer and legal scholar how to situate digital rights, such as net neutrality as one example, but also rights with particular digital implications within traditional legal frameworks. This goes back right to your point that we shouldn't make the mistake to forget existing laws and existing applications. This becomes more tricky as, of course, we're now in the world of the Internet of Things, where the online-offline boundaries are blurring. So we want to have a holistic perspective also when it comes to governance and laws and even fundamental rights. The second question that I'm very interested in going forward is, despite this emphasis on process innovation, of using technology to include many people and organizations in the drafting of such documents, what are the voices we're still excluding or marginalizing, and also what are the voices that are perhaps artificially amplified? And I'm looking forward to discuss that issue, particularly with our friends from Brazil and Italy, what their experiences have been. What can we do better to make such discussions even more inclusive, as this is still a bit of an elite topic, it seems. And then the last point, that most fundamentally, what does such a possible trend towards digital constitutionalism mean for internet freedom? Let me be very honest with you. I have moments in conversations, particularly recently in Europe, where I'm not so sure that the European spirit is the same as the Italian spirit. I hear strong interest by many politicians in this idea of Internet Bill of Rights, but in response to an internet that is perceived as a threat, as a problem, as something that is out of control and need to be pushed back into legal frameworks and traditional mechanisms of control. So let's watch closely what's happening in this space, and not only hope for the best, but work towards the best. And certainly Italy and Brazil have taken a leadership role. Thank you.
Viewers, and with that, I'll pass the floor to the last of our discussants, Ronaldo Lemos from the Institute of Technology and Society of Rio. So, Ronaldo, please take the floor.
Carlos, thank you very much. It's really great to be here in this panel. And before I start, let me just say that if you are interested in the process that led to the approval of the Brazilian Marco Civil, our Bill of Rights. We have this book here that ITS is actually distributing at IGF. It's also online. It's called Understanding Brazil's Internet Bill of Rights. It's in English. So I encourage you to approach someone from ITS to get a copy if you're interested. First thing that I have to say, for those who do not know me, I'm one of the directors of ITS in Brazil. And together with a lot of people in this room, including Professor Carlos Afonso and Professor Sérgio Branco, we spent basically 7 years of our lives dedicated to advocating and eventually passing the Marco Civil project in Brazil. This is not a work of a few individuals, but actually the work of so many individuals in Brazil who have achieved this passing of the law. So in this room I see Carlos Afonso from CGI, I see Danilo Doneda, I see Marcelo Leonardi, and quite a few other people who are already involved from the very beginning of this process in 2007. So the bill was started, had these discussions started in 2007. It was eventually passed in 2014, so it took a long time in order for the bill to pass. And I believe there are two things that are worth emphasizing here. One of them is the process through which the bill was built. So it was a collaborative process, a partnership that started with civil society and then was undertaken by the Brazilian government, at the time the Ministry of Justice. So we built an online platform in order that the discussions could be made at the public eye, and that was a crucial decision for the success of the initiative. So there were no negotiations behind closed doors. Every stakeholder, from the telcos to the broadcast companies, to the copyright holders, to civil society, to the federal police in Brazil, they all had to be clear and transparent online. So every other party could see what was the position of the other party involved in the discussions. And this was actually very important and made it possible for the bill to advance. So the process, I believe, is a very important one. The second thing is how transformative this process was. So in 2007, it was not obvious that Brazil would take this position of enabling internet rights. Actually, it was pretty much the opposite. The Brazilian position was kind of uncertain by them, and you could see that until very recently by the way that Brazil was positioning itself, for instance, in fora like the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. So Brazil was basically having this double position in the international sphere, and it was not clear that Brazil would go through that direction. Actually, in Brazil, instead of a Bill of Rights, there was a criminal bill to criminalize the internet, which almost got passed, and that would have been our SOPA and PIPA in Brazil on steroids. Because if that law had been passed, pretty much if you jailbreak your phone in order to connect with another carrier, you would be sent to jail for 4 years. And believe me, you do not want to spend 4 years of your life in a Brazilian jail. So this was what was going to happen. And Marco Civil emerged as a reaction to that. Instead of a criminal bill, let's build a civil rights bill, a Bill of Rights. And that's exactly what happened. So in this process, the Brazilian position turned to another position, which was a rights-enabling position. And I believe that was also very important because it had repercussions in the Brazilian stance at the international fora, which ultimately led, for instance, processes like the Net Mundial in 2014, which was a complete, clear statement on the part of the Brazilian government about where it was going and what was its position at the time. So I think it was a very transformative thing. Another thing that is important to share with you, there is a chart in this book that basically analyzes who were the stakeholders involved and what were their positions. So when you see what were their positions and what of those positions that actually got into the bill, you will see something that is very interesting, which is the fact that no one was a winner in the Brazilian law. So basically, every stakeholder had some of the positions that they were defended approved. Every stakeholder had positions that they were defending not approved. And that, I think, was a very interesting balance. And I think hearing what Urs was saying about these processes, that is interesting. So, for instance, in my view, the Brazilian Bill of Rights is almost always good, with a few exceptions. For instance, with the data retention provisions that Brazil actually passed, which in my view were overbroad, but not in the view of some of the stakeholders. So we didn't get that, for instance. And I think it's the same, for instance, with the Italian Bill of Rights, in which I see it as almost all positive in my personal view. And of course, it has some caveats, like the right to be forgotten, which in my view is overbroad, and just like our data retention provisions. But still, it's part of the political negotiations, it's part of the bargaining, and I think this is a healthy thing. Not every position will get all that they want, and actually you have to strike a balance in order to get Bill of Rights like these passed. The other thing that I would like to share is actually what happens after the bill is passed. So after 7 years of work, myself and Professor Afonso and Professor Branco, we said, well, now maybe we can rest and take some vacations because our job has been done. And actually, that is not really the case, because after these bills are passed, there is a struggle about what will be their interpretation, how are they going to be enforced, what does the bill stand for, and how the courts, the public prosecutors will actually deal with it. And not only that, how does the bill cover new issues? So for instance, the Internet of Things. How does the data retention provision applies to the Internet of Things? Should Brazil retain data for billions of devices that are going to be connected to the network? Who are going to bear those costs? And so how do we deal with that? Is this too much of a burden? So this is one of the questions that we have to decide now. The other thing is, for instance, how do you deal with copyright issues that are evolving? How do you deal with the transition from IPv4 to IPv6 and the repercussions that we'll have over privacy and over internet services as a whole? So these are things that the courts are now having to decide. And this basically makes me see that this work of a Bill of Rights, it never ends. So actually, you will have to keep working. Probably we have to keep working. Bad news for you, Carlos. For the rest of our lives, if you want to have a Bill of Rights that is evolving all the time and basically dealing with the transformations not only in society, but also in terms of the technology. I would like to end by saying that, in my view, what will make sure that technology is a force that is actually on the side of rights, on the sides of enabling capabilities, enabling development, and enabling personal development, is actually the law. It is the law that will actually make sure that technology does not turn into an instrument of surveillance, an instrument of social control, an instrument of repression, and so on. So I have a lot of friends and colleagues here who support the technology will solve these issues. So by enabling cryptography in all our communications, by enabling certain technical measures, we will actually prevent the technology goes the wrong way. I'm with them, but I don't think that is enough. I really think that it will be this old human technology called the law that will actually make sure that we do not go into a wrong direction regarding how technology is going to be used. So I see the technology and the way it's developing recently is an extremely powerful tool, especially for developing countries like Brazil. But in order to make sure that we really enjoy these possibilities, it is the law and initiatives like Bill of Rights, initiatives that translate constitutional rights into the digital realm that will actually make the difference. So the difference will not be in technology itself, the difference will be in the way we pass laws everywhere to make sure that technology is a positive and enabling force in our times. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronaldo. And just for a little housekeeping here, we have some room for questions from the audience. So if you want to make a question, we have some microphones in the room. So just raise your hand and please say your name and affiliation. We have two questions here. So one there in the back, and then one here in the middle. So. Can we get a mic there? Great. So Eduardo, so just say your name and affiliation then, please.
Hi, good morning to everybody. I'm Eduardo Bertoni. I'm from the Center for Studies on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information at Palermo University in Argentina. Congratulations for this panel and for having this Bill of Rights in Brazil and Italy. I would like to go to some point that Ronaldo just mentioned, which is implementation. Okay, what happened after you passed the law? And it is very common that this is a problem whenever you are working in policy making and you pass a good law and then you start realizing that you have very important implementation issues. So if it will be a trend around the globe to have this kind of, global or comprehensive laws like the Marco Civil or the Italian Bill of Rights, what would be your recommendation for the people who are start thinking having this kind of comprehensive laws? It would be better to think ahead in some specific issues that you are going to confront in the implementation process, or you think that it's better to move faster, to have the law, and then, cope with the problems in the implementation. I just read the Article 19 report about the assessment of the Marco Civil. There are problems now with the Marco Civil, and I'm glad that Ronaldo mentioned that after you pass the Marco Civil. So you have been working 7 years, you are not on vacation now because of the implementation. So what would be your recommendation for the people who are thinking in moving in the same direction? Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. Let me get the second question together so that we can go back to the panel. So if any other panelists wants to jump in the discussion. So Alex.
Thank you. My name is Alex Gakuru, Code IP Trust, a civil society organization in Kenya. And to Renato and Carlos, human rights discourse is indeed a lifelong undertaking, but I doubt you did know that. Yes, Professor, thank you very much for raising the point that it's no longer a question of simple multi-stakeholderism, which seems to be the answer that has been taken to try and fix this whole thing, multi-stakeholder. Given the fact that even multi-stakeholder, there's yet to be a definition of what that is. So it's a very amorphous thing. So I totally agree with you that it's infinite constitutionalism that will address this problem. I am totally in support of that. But with human rights above commercial and private interest. Now, I bring in the biggest threat to what we are trying to advance here, Marco Civil, the Italian Bill of Rights. And that's what has just been passed right now, negotiated in total secrecy, led by the country that used to be the leader in democracy. So many countries around the world, say for Europeans, have all been rallied together and negotiating interests that are commercial above human rights, done in secrecy, done by corporations. And this is the biggest threat. I think we should recognize this as a threat to realization of these laws in other parts of the world, and certainly also in Europe. Because if the US has been leading initiatives counter to what we are trying to achieve there, then I think there is a big problem, a big threat to realization of human rights above other rights on the internet. Finally, if we were to consider the US as the one leading this counter-narrative to realization of human rights, would it be inaccurate then to classify the US as a threat, the biggest threat to democracy, which is not multi-stakeholderism, and also online and offline around the world? Because if it leads where commercial interests are above all other rights, then I think we need to start looking at the position of the US and the policies it's pursuing, whether they are pro-human rights, anti-human rights, pro-democracy, or pro-multi-stakeholderism, is food for thought. And I think we need to start addressing that problem now and early. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Let me just go back to the audience. Do we have any other questions? Okay, so let's get those two questions and then go back to the panel. Okay.
Good morning. I'm Barbara Di Polito from Italy, and I'm working for ANAXO, which is an NGO Alliance for Child Safety Online. And Save the Children Online, Save the Children Italy is one of the members of ANAXO. So congratulations for the workshop, first of all, and then I'm particularly interested in the development of the Bill of Rights in Italy, because Save the Children Italy is based in Italy. Just a simple question. So where is the child in all this? Because we know that children and young people needs particular attention online in terms of data protection, privacy, abuse, cyberbullying, etc., etc. So how Internet Bill of Rights is going to take in account this issue? Thank you in advance.
Thank you. And just on interest of time, we have like two additional questions, and I'll cut the questions just after those two. So we have Parminder and we have Marcel here. And I really have to tell you that we have a second panel right after this one. So I will go back to our panelists to reflect upon the questions that have been made. And right after that, we will have a second panel that will go inside the details of the two Internet Bill of Rights and the forthcoming declarations that we imagined will happen. So we will have a more substantive approach on right to education, right to be forgotten, freedom of expression, and some other rights. So with that, we have Parminder, do you have a mic?
Yes.
Okay, so go ahead. So Parminder, then Marcel.
Thank you, Carlos. Both these initiatives, the Italian and Brazil, have been inspirational. I mean, lately I've read the Italian bill, which I am in civil society advocacy organization, and the kind of things which we have not put forward are there, and we really congratulate you for that. And the Marco Civil also was great and had an excellent process. But my question here is that we all know that internet is substantially, if not inherently, global. And while we do all these things, there is right now a dialogue going on in New York on WSIS plus 10 review, and I hear the same governments kind of say that there's not much to talk, much less legislate, or even make norms on the internet issue, and quicker we fold up this process, the better. And I see a problem here. I can understand the geostrategic issues, but I think we are missing the wood for the trees, and if we don't get together as a global community, start talking those normative things, and there is not an international law which is going to be made next year or even in 3 years, but unless we start talking as we have been talking education at UNESCO, health in WHO, we talk internet in a global space where everybody is equal, and we have research and analytical capacity which supports that talk, which itself is very important, which is available in UNCTAD, UNESCO, and other places. So what happens? The question here is that the same governments who talk the importance of these high initiatives and digital constitutionalism and stuff take a very different view there. And I think we need a correction here. And as Alex rightly pointed out, that it's not that global governance is not taking place, it's taking place through the trade laws. So it's not a vacuum that if we don't address it, we can address it after 5 days. There is a regime which is getting formed, but we refuse to see it with open eyes and actually have an internet space where we can talk norms around the internet, independent of security, of trade, of technical issues, which ITU does in high normative ways. And I would ask you, why would this initiative therefore not move to a global level? And last question, I understand you guys may say that IGF is a place to do it, but both the initiatives would have realized that proper norms taking place always in a tension between a governance authority and the people who want to make a change. It doesn't take place in an absence of a legislative, possibly legislative authority, if not an existing legislative authority. Some place where international law could probably be made, even if it is made after 10 years. Only when you have that kind of anchor, you have a real discussion around it. And we are lacking that at the global level. Thank you, and sorry for taking a little longer than I thought I would.
Oh, Parminder, thanks for that. And last question, so Marcel.
Really quickly, it was mentioned on the panel that there's a growing concern over companies actually creating these norms on content takedowns, that kind of thing. Brazil tried to solve that problem by establishing into law that essentially only a court order would be able to force companies to take content down. It does not prevent companies from establishing different terms of service and this kind of thing. Whereas in Europe, upon the Costerra decision, what was decided was essentially that companies, search engine in that scenario, would have to make that call themselves. So my question to the panel is, how do we balance these approaches? Is there a proper solution in the Italian bill or elsewhere in Europe?
Thanks for that, Marcel. So how are we going to handle that? My suggestion will be to bring back the questions to all of our panelists so that you can use this time in order to make not only your final considerations after the panel, but to react to the questions that have been brought by the audience. Okay? So with that, I'll pass the floor first to Professor Stefano Rodotà, and then we go all the way back.
I would like to answer to a general problem raised by many questions. The question was raised before by Mariette Schack, and completely agree with her about the problems to be dealt with raised by the activity of the companies, not only over the top. They are they are trying to shape the world. And why make reference with insistence to Internet Bill of Rights, generally speaking? Because the perspective of Bill of Rights is exactly the opposite of what is now the way over the top are working. But in this very moment, I must confess, when we are discussing about Internet Bill of Rights, the attitude is perceived as optimistic. But in fact, I am very worried about what is now happening, because only if we have the possibility to stress the perspective of the protection of fundamental rights on internet, we can have a critical mass for opposing the plans and the activities of the business community, mainly interested in its own growing. This is the first point. The critical mass. Critical mass means the courts. Critical mass means reflections by the academic world. Critical mass means activism. You can see in the Schramm decision an explicit reference to Edward Snowden. So this is the problem. Second, I am very worried about what can happen in Europe. I had experienced of the mistakes European Union can make. In 2000, the European Parliament, the group Article 29, the group of the Data Protection Commissioner were against the safe harbor in the form was passed by the Commission. And Commissioner Bolkestein fiercely opposed to the criticism. And I personally had with a very hard discussion with him. Now I could be satisfied looking at the decision of the Court of Luxembourg. There I can find all the criticism the Parliament and the Data Commissioner raised in that occasion. But I don't see in this very moment an attitude of the European Union, or more precisely speaking, of the Commission, about what can happen for the future of Internet. They are now negotiating a second safe harbor in secrecy, without a consultation, giving or not room to the Parliament. Is the Parliament ready to have an essential role, also discussing with the national parliaments and public opinions for improving a different way in the negotiation with the US? We must remember that in this very moment, negotiation about what can happen for fundamental rights is happening in TTIP, and without any guarantee of transparency, making it possible to an operation of neutralization of the courts like the Court of Justice with a special court of arbitration. So I am looking at the Internet Bill of Rights, but the Internet Bill of Rights is a way for having the awareness of what is now happening in the world of the business, what is happening in Europe on the side of politics, or about what is now happening in some countries. I was speaking, making reference to the Italian declaration of the inviolability of the technical machinery of of individuals. But France has passed some months ago a law making possible to insert in the personal machinery a boîte noire, black box for controlling continuously how this machinery is now used. So I think that many questions raised. The origin is, can we have a global alliance against this attitude? Can Internal Bill of Rights, not the Italian only the Italian declaration is a tool that can be used and can be useful in this very moment. But can we work in this direction or not? I answer your questions with another question.
Thanks, Professor. So pass the floor to Nena for your comments.
It's interesting to listen to him. It's really interesting. I would like to speak to the lady from Save the Children Italy. Yes. Many of us here are still young and we've made mistakes. But probably we made our mistakes offline because we are not digital citizens then. And it will be very easy for us to wipe away our mistakes. And that is why it is important to have the right to be forgotten and the right to remove stuff from the internet. Because I've tweeted earlier on that in 10 years, it will be very difficult for adults to explain to children that there was a time when smartphones and internet did not exist. Because our children born today grow up online. So they will make mistakes online. And we should be able to make provisions for mistakes made online to be corrected, especially by children and even by adults. So that will be my point to it. Coming back to Paminda's point, that is really one of the painful things, this double discourse. I recall before June this year, just before the SDGs were finally adopted, we at the Web Foundation were still knocking on doors to have digital inclusion as part of the SDGs, but it did not make it. In fact, the places you find the most cogent mentions of ICT is in gender. And I'm thinking it's not just a gender issue, it's a development issue. And ICT, harnessing the power of technology, is still being downgraded to developing countries, which should not be. So this double discourse is a worry for every single person that is interested in promoting and safeguarding rights online. And as you ask, what happens next? Maybe, Marisa, you are here and you are at the European Parliament. I think it's important that when a bill is adopted in Italy, Italy begins, after the bill is adopted, we need to read it because it's quick, it's done, it's gone away from the drafters. We now need to sit down and read it. What does it mean to us? How do we go about it? And we need to begin to inform our neighbors that this is what we have taken as a decision to do for our own selves. Because ultimately, the lack of rights in another country is a threat to the rights you have in your own country. The lack of rights in Burundi, far away in Africa, is a threat to all Italians in the heart of Europe. And so we cannot create a Bill of Rights, a national Bill of Rights, and sit down and be happy about it. It is important that we take the global view of human rights. It is one humanity. All of the people means everywhere in the world. And all of the internet means all of it. Not that commercial interest will cage us into some and kick us out of some. And all of the time means 24/7. So if it is the US that is becoming a threat, I think government should wisen up, should be brave enough to call on the US and say, you are the one becoming a threat to us. And US citizens should be brave enough to also say it at home and not just say it outside of the US. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. So, Majid.
Thank you very much. Absolutely essential, this global approach. But now coming back to the question about implementation, the fact that laws need scrutiny and updating and that democracy and universal human rights protection need daily work, I think is no surprise. So that should be expected. So everyone getting engaged should be in it for the long haul. But of course, having broad support by different stakeholders, having a broad majority, having a lot of buy-in always helps, because then it's not a few individuals supporting it, but it's a broader initiative of many stakeholders in societies. It's also important to think, while drafting any law or initiative, how it should be implemented. Which regulators are responsible? Is it binding, or is it a norm-setting exercise? How can you write it technically as good as it can be, so that there is no ambivalence? Ambivalence is one of the main reasons why court cases are brought, because those who want to oppose a law, seek to use the question marks or the vacuums in laws. And I think that's what Mr. Grasser also said, that a lot of these initiatives are initially norm setting and advocacy driven. So they're a proclamation perhaps more than an immediately enforceable law, or at least elements of it. And in order to make sure that these principles are as effectively enforced as possible, as effectively implemented as possible, you both need what I would like to visualize as a vertical approach, so very targeted, focused on a Bill of Rights, and a horizontal approach, which means that you weave the notion of individual rights in the digital era into all kinds of other decisions that you make. So it's almost like a pair of glasses that you put on, and you look at the world through that pair of glasses, whatever you see. So, for example, when it comes to human rights, how do they apply in the digital era? When you look at competition law, how do you ensure it applies online? Well, through net neutrality, for example. When security measures are devised, how do you ensure that they don't violate human rights? When development policies are drafted, how do you ensure that technology is incorporated? When standards are set, how do you ensure that they don't violate rights of people when standards that have a different implication in the rule of law and these technologies are exported to elsewhere, etc., etc. So you need both a horizontal and a vertical approach, if I can summarize it that way. Then, when it comes to United States, I want to, especially as we're seeking a global perspective here, and I mean, I'm very much in favor of a universal approach to human rights, so we should criticize any country that violates them. But it would be a mistake to paint the United States as the chief human rights violator in the world. It is just factually not true. And there are a lot of checks and balances in the American system. And I hope and I encourage everyone who can have an influence to use those avenues. But, and it's right to have high expectations of the United States as a democracy and as the host of so many tech and internet companies. But I would also be careful with very strong statements that it's the United States. And we should also note that there are many active discussions going on between different branches of government. So, for example, what the security agencies did is definitely not supported by all people in the government, etc., etc. So we really have to, I think, drill down a little bit more deeply. Then, very briefly, about, where was I? Oh yeah, I heard somebody saying that on the one hand we have the notion of everybody being equal, and so global efforts having to be made. I want to remind everyone that governments are still fairly powerful, that indeed there are other platforms which were referenced by the gentleman in his question. International efforts to seek legitimacy for top-down repressive practices online. And it's ongoing as we sit here in a more multi-stakeholder spirit. And so, again, I think this fits in this horizontal approach to seeking rights enshrined. We cannot just focus on one part of the discussion. We have to see which stakeholders, particularly the powerful ones like governments of repressive companies, are doing what. But on a positive note, I think we already have a critical mass. I'm a liberal in a classical sense. I believe that every individual everywhere in the world essentially wants to be free. Mm-hmm. And so you cannot have a larger critical mass than all those people. It's just a matter of how you leverage the power of the people vis-a-vis these entrenched and embedded structures that may hinder their full empowerment and the full respect for their rights. And so when looking at what a good strategy is, it's important to also look at what the risks are when trying to get international agreements among governments. Because if the governments that wish to restrict people's rights are going to outnumber those who want to respect them, then you may not want to take initiatives to, you know, platforms where you could be voted out. So it's very much strategy which is at play here. And then lastly, with regard to your comments about the European Commission, I couldn't agree more. Commissioner Ansip is here, however, so no to everyone. Perhaps ask him and push him a little bit for stronger EU initiatives. We're trying in the European Parliament for sure. But I think it shows that the Bill of Rights that we've seen and discussed shows that politicians can be persuaded and inspired to do the right thing with the right example. And so I hope you'll all continue your efforts, even if it's fairly difficult sometimes, and you have to be in it for the long haul. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjet. And then I'll pass the floor to Ronaldo.
Thank you, Carlos. Just to address Eduardo Bertoni's question, you asked about what would be the advice for future countries trying to go into those efforts. Well, I think there are 2 points here. First point, you have to map what are the issues that are evolving at the time. You have to do your best effort to do that. So when the Brazilian Bill of Rights were being discussed, basically that was 2007. So issues like freedom of speech and privacy, they were pretty clear, but issues like net neutrality, that was a bet. And actually that was a very successful bet, because in 2007, the idea of net neutrality was still very confusing, and it was really in the beginning of the discussions. But the point that I think is more important is that the Brazilian Bill of Rights is often referred as this bill that deals with privacy, net neutrality, free speech, and so on. But very few people point out what I think is one of the most important things in that bill, which is the fact that it limits the power of the executive government to actually interfere directly over the internet without the courts. And that is, I think, probably one of the key elements for any future Bill of Rights. It is to prevent the absence of the necessary checks and balances that need to be implemented regarding the exercise of power over the internet. So you see countries nowadays that are democratic countries like Turkey, Russia, making decisions in which the executive power actually receive more prerogatives to actually interfere or act directly regarding the internet and content on the internet. In the case of Brazil, what the bill did was actually to say that only the courts, never the government, can actually interfere with the net. So I think this is one of the key elements that need to be considered. So you have to consider a mapping of the issues of the time. Of course, you will have to make a few bets, and you will have to consider a key political element which has to do directly with the idea of a democratic government, which is checks and balances regarding the powers of that government over the internet. Just to conclude, I'd like to address Parminder's commentary. And I agree with you, because I see that internet governance is moving into trade agreements. And actually, this is a challenge even to fora like the IGF. While we sit here, we discuss in an open, inclusive way about internet governance, there are quite a number of other trade agreements that are basically being negotiated behind closed doors, and that are actually advancing many of the aspects of what we call internet governance and internet regulation. So I think your point is very important, and I think we need to recognize here at the IGF that trade agreements have now becoming a prominent instrument for decisions regarding internet governance. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronaldo. And then I pass the floor to Urs for the final comments.
What I'm trying to do here is just to end on, to make two final points that are perhaps a bit more abstract, but hopefully connect some of the dots for some of you at least. The first point is, let's do some expectation management. We have had a very optimistic panel, I would say, with respect to this vision of Internet Bill of Rights. But let's also acknowledge that it has taken us a very long time to figure out constitutionalism in the offline world. And we're working on a very aggressive timeline here when we now think about a global digital world order and to create that just in a few years' time. I think it's important to acknowledge that we operate under conditions of uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity, as we heard. I see at least three key challenges. One, we still don't fully understand what's happening on the internet. We don't fully understand user behavior. We don't fully understand the behavioral economics of the various players involved. So children were mentioned. That's one of my areas of studies. Very interesting use case there that we are confronted with very rapidly changing user behavior and learning as well. So we have a data problem. The second aspect that makes it harder to create these kind of global and ambitious frameworks is, of course, the normative questions in which you touched upon. There are strong disagreements and strong views on at least 20% of the issues, while we may agree on 80%, given different cultures and values. And then the third challenge is also that we do not know very well what are the best instruments available to achieve the goals that we may agree upon, and some of which we have discussed today. We should certainly not count or put all our hopes on law. Law is a very, and I'm saying that as a law professor, law is a very a wonderful instrument, I agree, but it also comes with limits. And I believe we live in a world of blended governance and have to think beyond law for a number of reasons, including the international dimension. The second point is shorter. I do believe, even more importantly than the Internet Bill of Rights, is perhaps the observation that much of the discussion about the Internet Bill of Rights signals that we are at a moment of moral reimagination, and that's a great opportunity. One of the beautiful things about the Internet is that we can build it, we can shape its contours for the future, and I think here we have this wonderful opportunity to use the same technology to have conversations about how we re-envision, reimagine our normative future together. That, dear Alex, also requires that we move beyond dichotomies, private versus public, law versus multi-stakeholder, constitutions versus multi-stakeholder processes. Indeed, I believe we need this third way where we create and increase interoperability among actors, value systems, belief systems, and the like. So I'm looking forward to continuing that conversation with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Urs, and thanks to all of our panelists. So right now we are going to end this panel and begin the second panel. I would like just make a quick announcement for those who arrived a little bit late and couldn't get a great part of the discussion. We are having an evening event that is a continuation of this discussion, because as we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of CGI-BR, there will be an open conference in the Tambau Hotel that we will have the continuation of the discussion of this first panel with Professor Rodotà, with Professor Urs and Ronaldo and Juan Carlos de Martin and other panelists of this session. So just make this quick announcement of the evening event, and you're all invited to that. And with that, let's just end this panel, and I will ask Anna to take the lead. In the second panel, we will have not only Anna as a moderator, but Juan Carlos de Martin, Stefano Trumpi, Paolo Coppola, Giovanna De Minico, and Danilo Doneda. Could you please come to the table? And we have two panelists that are not already in the room, Fadi Shahadi and Frank LaRue, and as soon as they arrive, we'll put it on the table. So thanks, everyone. So, thank you. Thank you.
People who were supposed to be here are not here, so I will first present. I'm following the program, which is, by the way, we printed it out. It's out there together with the Bill of Rights, and whoever wants a copy can go get it. So on my left is MP Paolo Coppola, and he is a member of the Committee of Internet Studies that we did at the House of Representatives in Italy. And on my right is also Juan Carlos de Martin. He's also a member of the committee, and he's professor from the Nexus Center. He's a professor of Politecnico in Torino, and also Nexus Center for Internet and Society. Next to Juan Carlos de Martin is Professor Giovanna De Minico from University of Naples, and she is also a member of the Interdepartmental Center Hermes and member of the Italian Parliamentary Committee of Study. And next to her is Stefano Trumpi, who is a member of the Italian Parliamentary Committee of Study, and he's here representing ISOC, Internet Society. And next to him is Danilo Doneda, who is a consultant of the Brazilian Ministry of Justice. And hopefully Fadi Chehadeh from ICANN and Frank LaRue from the UN will join us around noon. I will ask Paolo Coppola. I know Paolo Coppola and Juan Carlos de Martin have presentations with slides, so they might get up and go to the presentation. I think you need to get up, right? And attach the presentation. Okay. All right. So, c'hanno già? Ma tu forse devi dargliela loro che te lo... Al tuo. sei in grado di collegarle? Glielo diciamo loro? Okay. Okay, so the first presentation is by MP Paolo Coppola, and I will ask him to introduce the subject of his speech, which is we asked him to speak about privacy and identification, but of course, I mean, whatever he has prepared, he will tell us himself. Thank you. Okay, in the meantime, if you prepare questions and let me know, I will keep track, you know, if you raise your hand, I will try to keep track of the hands raised so that afterwards you can participate in the discussion. So, se non sei pronto posso parlare prima però. Ce la fai? Ok. Vai. We're almost ready, sorry.
Okay, thank you. I will talk to you about our declaration, especially about the subject of privacy and identification. The more important article about privacy is the Article 5 about protection and personal data. The first paragraph is not only about privacy. States that we don't take care only about privacy, but the respect of dignity and identity. So, which data we are talking about? We're talking about the data consisting information that allows someone to trace the identity of a person. We think that this is a good definition of data about privacy. And so we include data pertaining generated by device, as well as other data gathering and processing for the development of profiles. And we state in paragraph 3 that everyone has the right to access data that concern them, and the right to obtain rectification and erasure of the data. Then, in paragraph 4, we state that there are some principles that you have to follow in order to process data. And we state that in any case, the right of every individual to informational self-determination shall prevail. We have another article that stress this point. This was a bit controversial point because naturally there was different point of view in the Commission, and I think this is a good balance between different visions about the freedom of use, all data for providing providing new services, and the right of the person to prevent illegal use of the data. Paragraph number 5 talk about in the consent. So you can collect data only with the informed consent of the data subject. and the consent shall be revocable. Mm, yeah, but the consent is not enough. In paragraph number 6, we say that consents do not constitute a legal basis for the processing of data when there is a significant imbalance of power between data subject and the data processor. And finally, is important the purpose. You cannot use data for discriminatory purpose, directly or indirectly. Then there are other articles that focus on particular points that are already introduced in Article 5. The Article 6 is about the informational self-determination. And then we stress again that every person has the right to access of the data, even if there's it's not important where data is stored, or it's not important about the data controller, but you always have the right of rectification, erasure, and we state even supplementation. I think it's important to talk to you also about the Article 9 and the rights to identity. We state that every person has the right of an up-to-date representation of the identity on the internet. And the use of algorithms and probabilistic techniques in any case should be known to the data owner, to the subject of the data, and anybody has the right to oppose the construction of profiles regarding him or her. Then we state that every person has the right to provide only the strictly necessary information. Article 10 is about the protection of anonymity. The balance is about restrictions that we state that are allowed only when only if they are necessary, proportional, and grounded in law. And in paragraph 3, we say that in the event of violation of dignity and fundamental rights, the courts may require the identification of the author. We need a different subject, different from the government, in order to prevent essentially the no anonymity in the internet. I think that these are the articles about the privacy and identification in our declaration, and this is the picture that you can see in the keyhole that I showed you in the first slide of my presentation. This is a beautiful place in Rome, and I wanted this to put this because I wanted to express that not every time is a bad thing to look inside the keyhole. Sometimes you can find something beautiful if you allow this, and if you have the full control of this this sort of known privacy. Thank you.
By the way, Nenna before was talking about implementation, and you mentioned non-discrimination. I asked maybe Stefano Quintarelli, who's in the room with you and who's also working on this with you, can give us a little insight on what kind of bill is being passed right now, will be approved next week in Italy regarding non-discrimination. Would you like to come and tell us, Stefano? Thank you. And in the meantime, Professor De Martin gets ready with his slides.
Thank you. So basically, we have a bill in process, and in the first panel, Nana said, what about adoption and then implementation? So as a matter of fact, for implementation, we have a bill in the process of being approved by the Italian Chamber of Deputies, and unfortunately it could not be approved before the IGF because of a formal issue on one of the commas on one of the articles, but the rest of the bill, so 95% of the bill has already been approved, and the final, this final comment is going to be approved next week, and it's a bill about network neutrality and non-discrimination on access to information through devices and this kind of stuff. So it's going to be approved next week in the Chamber of Deputies, then it will move to the Senate, and we expect very rapid response and approval times.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your clarification, Stefano Quintarelli. Okay, the next speech is on the right to a digital education. It's in our Bill of Rights is right number 3, so it's very high up there, right after access, the right to access, and the right, the recognition and protection of all rights. So the right to online knowledge and education, and who will talk about this to us is a professor who teaches, so he has a lot to do with education, and he's also one of the founders of the Nexus Center for Internet and Society in Torino. Thank you, Juan Carlos.
Thank you, Anna. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to talk to you about one of the rights in the Declaration, which is the rights to a digital education. Let me start with reminding us that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 does have the right to an education is Article 26, is longer than these. I just kept the first sentence, everyone has a right to education. And after 1948, we've seen an extraordinary expansion of education worldwide at all levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary education. I'll just show you a picture about the most demanding, which is tertiary education. You see a huge expansion, particularly after the 60s, worldwide. These are numbers that go back to 2005, and since then, the last 10 years, this expansion has continued. It could really be deemed as an exponential expansion of education. The purposes of this education are more than one. You find it also in the Universal Declaration of 1948. Currently, there is a huge emphasis on educating workers, so to contribute to the economic sphere of human activities, which is perfectly fine. But of course, it's more than that. We have education in order to create citizens, and you find that in the Declaration 1948. And we have education in order to improve the life of human beings. So intrinsic motivations in order to have a full personality and to live a full life. Now, the digital revolution comes about, and what does that mean for the right to education? Of course, this traditional right to education is still there, it's still the fundamental, the basis for everything else, including an education for the digital revolution. The digital revolution is an extraordinary, profound change, and it urgently calls for specific actions regarding education. In order to fully benefit from the digital revolution, that's one step. So not just a superficial benefits, just using superficially tools and services online, but more fully to take advantage of the opportunities for freedom of expression, to access to knowledge, for collaboration, to improve our personal relationships and services, and so on and so forth that we all know. But at the same time, we need digital education also to minimize the risk connected to the online environment, because we know there are. And just to mention one that is recently receiving a lot of attention is, for instance, distraction. The online world has been very carefully and very wisely produced in order to create distraction. We have what some scientists call hyperpalatable stimuli that continuously try to hook us in activities that not necessarily are in the best, our best interest. And also, for many people, without proper education, some actions online, it's difficult to foresee the actual consequences of what they do online. And that's one way of doing that, is to provide them with critical tools and information in order to see that. And also education in order to make people able to contribute, so not only to be passive consumers, but also to contribute to the online world, contribute knowledge, contribute services, contribute software, depending on their interest and their skills. And finally, and it's maybe particularly relevant considering where we are right now, to contribute to shaping the digital world. As Professor Gasser mentioned, the internet and digital technology is something that we can shape, is something that is being shaped constantly, even as I speak. And so we need also not only corporations and governments and other powerful actors, but also citizens to be able to, even just exercising their political rights, to shape the digital world. But in order to do that, you need knowledge and you need education. And so more broadly speaking, I could say that we need digital culture, which is the basis then for an education. And the digital culture is many things. We are shaping digital cultures and creating digital cultures in the last few decades. Its digital culture is also coding, fine. I'm a computer scientist, I'm all in favor of coding, but it's much more than coding. It's a much broader awareness of what the digital revolution is doing and could do in the future. Now, coming to the Declaration of Internet Rights that was produced by the Study Commission of the Italian Parliament, the Article 3, Article 26 was the declaration in 1948, right to online knowledge and education. And I will just focus your attention on the 3 paragraphs that specifically deal with education. Every person has the right to be placed in the condition to acquire and update the skills necessary to use the internet in an informed manner for the exercise of his or her rights and fundamental freedoms. 4, public institutions shall promote, especially through the educational and training system, the informed use of the internet, and shall take steps to eliminate any form of cultural lag that might preclude or limit the use of the internet by any person. And finally, the informed use of the internet is an essential guarantee of the development of equal opportunities for individual and collective growth. The democratic rebalancing of disparities in power on the internet between economic players, institutions, and citizens, the prevention of discrimination and risky behavior, as well as conduct detrimental to the freedoms of others. And I think this also, to some extent, answered to one of the questions made in the previous session by the person from Save the Children Italy. In conclusion, we need to ensure the right to digital education for all citizens. So we need to provide the education to core, that's the basis, and on top of that, integrating that with the digital education. And I believe that it's a key element to ensure that the digital revolution delivers the maximum benefit for the people of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is going very speedily. So the next panelist who will talk about some of the rights that we have really addressed at the committee, she will talk more about the balancing of competing rights, and especially in particular, she has studied the fundamental rights and terrorism in the age of the internet. So how do you balance security and human rights? Giovanna Domenico, please.
Thanks, Anna. Many thanks to everyone. In fact, I'd like to give a very short speech on this issue, fundamental rights and terrorism in the age of internet. My speech will be divided into three parts. The first, the law of fear. Second, the European laws of fear. And the third, towards a new emergency law. The Italian Declaration on Rights in Internet that today we are presenting you has posed, in my opinion, a basic question of a minimum guarantees needed for the fundamental rights in Internet. The crucial questions are, to what extent may a state legally squeeze the liberties in order to prevent the risk of terrorism? And then, which model of law of fear is suited to the criteria of constitutional legitimacy and coherent with the guarantees posed by the Declaration? The model of law of fear intends to prevent that the danger of a future event is translated into actual and certain damage. The legislature must move on the slippery slope of risk, meant as both the verification and the calculation of the probability of its taking place. On the one hand, a present and secure damage occurs to the fundamental rights that are being compressed. But on the other hand, the future and the hypothetical advantage is expected to the security that would be strengthened. In light of these, Chief Justice, I refer to national but also supranational from the Supreme Court of the United States, the leading case is Kate 162, but to the European Court of Justice, the recent case Digital Rights Ireland versus Ireland, have been narrowing the political discretion of the policymaker in accordance with the principles of precautionality and proportionality, which guarantee a balanced coexistence between competing values. The first principle guides the policymaker in its ex-ante prognosis of the threatened danger. Carl Sunstein. The question he must answer the following: what are the chances of the risk actually happening, and which is the level of a tolerable risk? The second principle requires the legislature to compare the cost borne by certain freedom which would be compressed with the benefit of an increased safety. The difference in weight between cost and benefit suggests that the judges set the proportionality not in the usual term of equivalence, but in those of reasonable inequality. The advantage to protect the value, security, because of its uncertainty, must exceed the certain damage caused to the compressed right, the right to freedom or the right to privacy. If you want to see more on this subject, you can see my paper published in Italian online journal Federalism. Let's go to the second point of my speech, the European law of fear. My analysis will now address to the main European law in the wake of Charlie Hebdo. The United Kingdom was already active on the topic before Charlie Hebdo with the Counter-Terrorism and Security Bill 2014. Under this bill, the UK isolated the suspected people of terrorism, withdrawing the passport to prevent their entry or exit from the country. France, although criticizing the American Patriot Act, but France, as de facto, assumed it as a model. The recent Decree 125 of 2015 has strangled the freedom of thought without ensuring an efficient prevention against terrorism. Further measures favoring states espionage have been adopted in a very recent law of intelligence. In this case, we are lucky because this law has been just approved 2 days ago by the French Parliament, and now this law, to be perfect, is waiting for just the advice of Constitutional Council. This last piece of legislation implies that the phone conversation and the online communication be kept by telco and internet service providing, operating in French territory for a very long period of time. If requested, the said companies will have to transmit those data to the public authorities without another from the judge, but in force of another of the Prime Minister. Here, even the much blamed American system has been surpassed, in my opinion. Indeed, the NSA must in all cases be authorized by the judge before any wide recollection of the user phone and online extrinsic data. Furthermore, the French law does not pay an attention to the ban imposed to the European Court of Justice. I refer to Digital Rights Ireland against Ireland. The European judge, just to sum up briefly, in name of proportionality and necessity, not only has overruled the EU Directive 2006/24, which obliged the telco and ISP to keep those data for a minimum of twice, but the European judge also has designed implicitly new waves of data detention very well detailed as to form and aim. By contrast, the French solution appears oppressive and burdensome. The law implies 21. Therefore, any French citizen becomes ipso iure a presumed suspect unless the contrary is proved. Accordingly, the unlimited time, the massive surveillance, the general presumption of guilt, the absence of the security of the national authority, which the Court of Justice has held to be unlawful, now appears once again in the French legislation, making the European decision as inutilitated data. The Italian legislation is very close, the recent Italian legislation is very close to French one. For a more in-depth examination, please refer to the observation that I've given to the second and the fourth commission of the Chamber of Deputies during the procedure of conversion of our decree law on urgent measure against terrorism. Now go to the third part of my speech. As evidenced by the legislation just examined, the fight against terrorism has opened the door to very significant breaches of the constitutional order. Therefore, let us briefly consider the damages, because we should have also a positive project that could lead the emergency regimes back to legality, and to what extent our Italian declaration could contribute to pursuing this objective. First, for what concerns the US system, first of all, the principle of separation of power should be taken into account, and it means that all power that now has been given to the government must be given back to the parliament. Second, a common remedy for both US and European experience could be found into leading the legislature back to the respect of the principle of precautionality and proportionality, which have to be taken into account, especially when fundamental rights and democracy itself are at risk. Going back to my starting point, and so this circle is going to close, the emergency legislation has been given a mandate to preserve the endangered legal system. The extraordinary law has its own natural limit in bringing the system back into balance, which has been temporarily altered and threatened by the state of danger. In order to do so, the derogatory power has to be limited in time, avoiding the occurrence of irreversible breaches to the established order. Such breaches would alter the core of both fundamental principle and liberty of the constitutional order, preventing the system from resuming its original identity. It's obviously can mind for a constitutionalism the concept of a counter limit, but it is not the place to discuss. To sum up, the measure of prevention must not be extraordinary, and I want to underline this concept, must not be extraordinary, but compatible with the system. The emergency power, despite being exceptional, still remains a constituted power, subject to the requirement of the rule of law. This power does not write on a white blackboard, because there is a constitutional framework to be respected. In conclusion, the fundamental right and the guarantee of democracy must be defended, and especially in time of crisis. The basic assumption is that the value of democracy must be constructed as a prevailing upon any other value. The same assumption can be found in the Italian Declaration of Rights in Internet, for example, as the right to access to Internet, Article 2, which is to be considered nowadays a fundamental right and the cornerstone of democracy. Consequently, the Declaration states that the right to access may not be made conditional upon budgetary limitation or restriction of public money. The state might pursue its budgetary balance, providing that an adequate response be given to everyone. From this point of view, our Italian declaration may offer to domestic legislation, but moreover to international policymakers, and I'm very proud to have taken part to this committee, a strong political reference for a correct framework of values. This is a most significant innovation as to the approach to the regulation of Internet up to now adopted. If you want to know more about this topic, you can read my paper that I've already published in the website of Italian Association of Constitutional Law. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I know that that Fadi Chehada is here, but I think since he hasn't entered the room yet, I will ask Stefano Trumpi from ISOC and from also the Parliamentary Committee to address the issue of internet governance and multi-stakeholderism and how this applies to our Internet Bill of Rights. And as soon as Fadi Chehada comes in, I'll ask him to please join us at the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I will comment about the last article of the declaration, that is Article 14. And this is titled Internet Governance. And I think that what I'm trying to say is how the Internet Bill of Rights is an important part into the agenda of the Internet Governance and Internet Governance Forum in particular. And so the first sub-point is referring to the globality, because the point affirms that for every citizen, for every user of the network, his rights should be understood and respected not only in Italy, where we developed our declaration, but everywhere in the world. So, and this is a very important point. And someone of you commented this morning concerning the word the citizenship. That is, citizenship is not mentioned as a word in our declaration, but is something that is important in order to understand how can expect the digital citizens to see that their rights are respected. This is a very important point. So then in another sub-articles we speak about different levels that are the global level, just of the citizenship, the national level, and the regional levels. This is something that is quite relevant, and our committee, although worked a lot, worked mainly in Italian, and so really took care of the global aspects of what we are doing. And then I have even to say that our cooperation with Brazil has been always very important, because we invited the CGI in Brazil in the February 2013. Then we invited the Marco Civil people to, and always in the Chamber of Deputies. So here we have tried to build in our declaration with a general view that is really global, let's say. And it is very important, because some of the comments you had before in the previous panel, we insisted on national activities towards insertion in the global world. This is a very important point. Then I want to mention something about the last item of this declaration, where it is constitution and maintenance of national and supranational authorities involved in internet governance should be constituted, if not operational, at the national level, and this is one of the points that we are discussing in Italy in this period, in order to evaluate the conformity of new norms or new rules in the internet with the principles of this declaration, because this sometimes is normal, conflict of interest, let's say, as it was reminded here with the war against terrorism and privacy and all these aspects. So, it is, I want to mention complete what the Parliament decided on November 3rd, and Professor Rodotà and Quintarelli, they described how it was treated, our Declaration on Internet Rights. But we had also another part that is bringing to the point of the authorities to be constituted, that are in the end of Article 14, that is that the Parliament decide to ask the government, as a second point, to promote the constitution of an entity for the internet governance in Italy, following the multi-stakeholder model by involving all interested parties. And this is something that is certainly important, interesting, in order to be also able then to start with provisions generated by the government, or to study new rules that are able to assure a model that is not so dissimilar from your CGI. It is obvious by that in Brazil you had a framework situation that was consolidated in the 90s and so on. And in Italy we have different equilibriums between the authorities and the private sector, also with the civil society and the expert of the internet. So it is clear that at a national level it is important to adapt the model of that you realized here in Brazil to the national situations, and this is an important work to do, and I'm glad that now Fadi is here because he also participated in some of our events at the Chamber of Deputies, even quite recently, talking about the adoption of the CGI model in an Italian sauce, let's say, or something like that. Thanks. I finish here my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Great timing, and welcome Fadi Chehadeh from the ICANN. And you just arrived in time for your speech on internet governance. We just started talking about it because Stefano Trumpi explained Article 14, which is the last article of our declaration, and so which is on internet governance. And so we are welcoming you to talk about it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for welcoming me here. I have been at ICANN for almost 4 years, and there are very few times in the kind of work we do, the political work, the global engagement work, where we can declare a victory. It's very difficult. Of course, victories are gray, you know. Is this really a victory or not? But here today, I must tell you what happened in Italy is a clear victory. It really is. It really is. I'm besides myself happy about what the Italian people have done here. And it should be really put on a very high hill, and everyone should understand the leadership that Italy has showed here. Every one of the people here, and certainly Mr. Giacomelli, who's not with us, and others, and in the parliament, the leadership in the parliament has been remarkable. The openness, the willingness to listen, to engage. And today, I think I can tell you that Italy now in Europe is actually a pioneer and a leader, because there aren't many places, even in advanced Europe, where you have the country come together with such clarity and say, we want to establish a multi-stakeholder internet governance space where the Italian people, all of them, all the stakeholders, can participate in shaping the digital sector in that country. So really, my deepest congratulations to all of you for your commitment. Every one of you, from those who historically, like Stefano, brought this to a certain level, but those of you who carried the hard work in the last few months to bring this all the way to an excellent resolution. And to our Brazilian friends who were kind and supportive throughout the process. I just want to thank them for their generosity. We just heard in the room across that the Brazilian CGI is about to start a global effort to share their best practices with other countries. Just a few days ago, Thursday and Friday, I was in Egypt and in Lebanon meeting their government and their community. They are seeking to figure out how to replicate this great model in Brazil, which now we could tell them instead of necessarily coming down to Sao Paulo, they could go to Rome, and that's good too. We could learn from each other and share our best practices. But this is very key, and CGI has been a pioneer 20 years ago now with this model, and their success is just, look at it. I mean, we don't need to tell you they're successful. Go look at what they've accomplished, and it speaks for itself and what it's done. Even this entire event is really enabled because the CGI is a very, very organized community effort. When I met President Rousseff in late 2013, when the world was very worried about internet governance after the Snowden revelations, I went to see, at the request of Kofi Annan, he said, please go see President Rousseff. She is very worried about internet governance. And I arrived to her palace at that time, and they only finally let me in to see her. And you know what happened in the first minute of the meeting? She said, where's CGI? That was her first question. I'm in Brazil, and I'm discussing with the president of Brazil internet governance, and her first question was to me and to all her staff, where is CGI? And I told her, Madam President, the Hartmut Glasser from the CGI is sitting outside your palace. She told her chief of staff, go get him now. We cannot have the meeting without him. And CGI is not a government body. It is an independent body that exists to serve Brazil. And here the president of Brazil could not have a meeting with me unless CGI was at the table. So I hope Italy, and I met with Prime Minister Renzi, and I shared with him my view about this importance. And I'm glad the Parliament is now moving forward with this important role. So enough about that, but thank you to Brazil and thank you to Italy. Just a couple of comments on internet governance. I think the digital space is the space that is being defined for the 21st century right now. Just like we saw industrial revolutions occur at the turn of the 20th century, we're now entering the digital century. And I must tell you today, in 2015, that the understanding of how to build our digital century by those who need to set rules and policies for that is still very low. We do not have a real understanding how this will happen. Now, that's an opportunity for someone like me who's an entrepreneur. That's an opportunity. We shouldn't be sad about this. We should say, okay, what can we do to shape this space? And right now is the moment. And this is why the great news starting to come from New York, that it seems like the IGF will be renewed for 10 years. For the next 10 years, the IGF has a unique role in starting to shape how the internet will be governed. And I'm delighted that the global leaders are seeing this, and I hope the WSIS process will confirm that renewal. But now, what do we do within that? I'm going to posit to you that there are really 3 layers of digital governance. The first layer, which is the infrastructure layer, is largely well handled today. Think of this as the 75,000 networks that are the internet today. The governance of these networks is largely in shape, whether it's the ITU, the IEEE, the IETF that produce standards and protocols, or governments and regulators that produce policies. That's pretty well managed. The next layer of digital governance is the logical layer, because as you know, the 70-some thousand networks are not one network. What makes the internet look like the internet is the logical layer, which is the names, numbers, and protocols. That layer is coordinated by ICANN with the IETF, the regional registries, etc. That layer, until 3-4 years ago, was also in question as to how it's managed. But today, I think we are largely watching the affirmation globally that ICANN, as the coordinator of this layer, is the place for it to be. We no longer hear that the ITU is interested to control that. We no longer hear, even in the documents coming out of New York, that the UN is looking at that. I think we and the ITU have reached a very peaceful understanding that the logical layer will be coordinated by ICANN. Now, again, with the ICF and all the other players in it. The last thing left to finalize this layer is to make ICANN independent. ICANN remains contracted by the US government. I think all of us know this project is going very well, and that within a few months, maximum a year, we should find ICANN independent. And the independence of ICANN is the best guarantee of the integrity of the logical layer, not the other way. So some people have said having the US government maintain its oversight over ICANN is the guarantee. Actually, I would disagree respectfully. The best guarantee of ICANN's stability is its independence from any one party. And that is the second layer, which I believe within a few months we will look at it as a stable, steady layer, independent of control by anyone, but rather owned and managed by the multi-stakeholder community. Which leaves us to the last layer of internet governance, and this is the layer where bodies like what's being created in Italy now or other countries will be very important. And that is what happens on the internet. So physical layer, networks. Second layer, logical layer, the coordination layer that makes the internet look like one internet. And that layer cannot be fragmented, because if it's fragmented, we'll have 2 internets, 3 internets, 4 internets. And 4 years ago, we almost had 2 internets. It was this close. And now that China, Brazil, India have all come to ICANN meetings at the highest level and said, one internet for the world and ICANN will coordinate it, I think we're good there. Now we come to what's on the internet. What is on the internet? What needs to be managed on the internet? Well, to start, there is a new map that was released this morning across the hall from NetMundial, netmundial.org/map, that shows the 90 issues on the internet. Everything from child protection to cyber warfare. These are the 90 issues that the community has outlined as issues on the internet. And here, internet governance, in my opinion, is in very early stage. We really don't know how to do it. Why don't we know? Because in this space, we do not have solutions that work with old governance models. The internet is transnational. It is not built around jurisdictional lines and models. And therefore, when a body in Italy is created, it cannot function in isolation of what's happening in the world. One of the greatest things the Brazilians did is to create a body for Brazil. But one of the main jobs of CGI is to ensure that national policies are in sync with regional and global policies. You cannot be an island. So the fact we create national bodies like the one being birthed in Italy now is simply to ensure that we synchronize national, regional, and global issues. So here is the challenge of the future. And who will solve it? So for the middle layer, we all agreed ICANN will coordinate it, for example. Who will coordinate the top layer? Who will make sure these 90 issues are coordinated? So I'll finish by telling you the half answer. No one body should. So for all of us running around looking for the silver bullet perfect body that should do this, I'm telling you right now, there will be no one body. The power of the internet is to build governance that looks like the internet. Distributed, highly distributed. And in legal terms, what we're calling this space is polycentric, as opposed to centralized. So for people who say, oh, the UN should control what's on the internet, or the IGF, or any other body, or let's create a new body, or no, the answer is no. Instead, let's create multiple centers of expertise and knowledge that address the 90 issues. And then to coordinate all these centers, we can create maps and initiatives like the NetMundial, which doesn't solve anything, but coordinates different things. So I hope you will join us at this IGF to innovate in governance. We always innovate with mobile applications and with technology, but it is time to innovate in governance itself. Governance needs innovation. For those of you who read The Economist last week and saw the blockchains and what they're doing to how they will change how a government will record land ownership in Honduras, that's powerful. Technology is reshaping governance as well. And so we, the people of the technology, I invite you today and this week to not be afraid to innovate in governance. Governance needs innovation as well. So all the best to you, and many, many congratulations to Italy and to Stefano Prodota. Is he here? Stefano? Okay, please stand up. I want to thank you for, I found out, no, really many, many thanks for what you did, for the leadership you did in Italy to coordinate all of this. And bravo.
Thank you so much, Fadi Jehadeh, and thank you to everybody. And I'm very grateful that actually this ended with a thanks to Rodota, who really helped us achieve this. This has been something that we worked on for 10 years. Now, the last one at the table who's going to speak and honor us of his speech is Danilo Doneda. He's the consultant for the Brazilian Ministry of Justice, and he will talk about the Brazil's data protection draft bill of law. And I was wondering if someone knows anything about Frank LaRue. Is he able to come to conclude the session or not? Let me know, please. So please, Danilo Doneda. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I will talk about a piece of legislation that still lacks comprehensive regulation in Brazil, which is data protection. We must take into account that Marco Civil followed the example of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union when, between the principles of the use of internet in Brazil, stated two different principles: the principle of the protection of privacy and another principle, the protection of personal data. This is due for a very interesting and fruitful reasoning to the inspiration of Professor Rodota, Professor Spiro Simitis, who coined this kind of duality of principles related to privacy, but different, independent ones, which is very valuable for us when interpreting and applying Marco Civil to privacy and data protection issues. But the most interesting fact is that when Marco Civil stated the principle of protection of personal data, Marco Civil did it according to the law. And the question is, which law? Which law Marco Civil points to when it says that personal data must be protected in Brazilian internet? Well, Brazil is one of the few big economies in the world without general regulation on data protection. Much has been done, much has been used in Brazilian internal framework to protect personal data through means of consumer law. So consumer privacy is a rather fruitful and interesting experience in Brazil. Nevertheless, we still have several worries about personal data usage by public bodies. We have several kinds of personal data abuse in every sector. We are the champions of bank fraud, most probably due to the immense opportunity of using personal data, which is available on official and non-official databases that abound in Brazil. We used to have several scandals. I used to think that unfortunately every 2 or 3 months we have a major scandal about personal data usage. And nevertheless, there's also the fact that the private sector also needs in Brazil clear rules governing what they can do regarding personal data, because if we don't have a general data protection law, we still have a strong privacy principle founded in Constitution, which can be used in ways that we cannot predict for sure. So the fact is that Brazil right now needs some clear rules about data protection, and it is a demand from Brazilian citizens, it's a demand from Brazilian private sector, most of it, and it's also something that will make the lives of governments officials much, if not easier, much more fair, because right now government managers of personal data worries about personal liability that can fall into them when using personal data in some way that may seem as unfair according to current law. Why Brazil doesn't regulate data protection until now? We can, if you make a map of data protection in the world, in Latin America, we shall see that Argentina, countries such as Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, Peru, Mexico, basically all others of the biggest economies in the region, all have regulated data protection in a general law. What's the reason of the Brazilian exception? Some may say that it can be due to some public nature of Brazilian people, of the Brazilian individual, that would be presumably expensive and even cool about sharing their own data. I hear this every now and then. I hear this, unfortunately, more than I think I need to, because I believe that those assumptions are not only unfactual, but they reveal a general prejudice about a certain kind of typical Brazilian individual that cannot be taken seriously. In fact, Brazilians are, just as everyone else in the world, are worrying about disclosure, about abuse of their personal information. Brazilians also feel so strongly that they must be in control of their personal data. We must say also that we have in the last 10 to 15 years, more or less 40 million people which arose from poverty to the internal market, to the internal formal market. They integrate the formal workforce right now. And yes, you can say that privacy wasn't their first concern when they began to integrate that formal workforce, their formal medium class. But it's constantly becoming one real and concrete concern, even for those 40 million people. And I must say that in the following years, one that doesn't bet on a kind of regulation of privacy, or one which bet on a typical nature of a Brazilian stereotypical individual, must not be concerned about reality of our problems. Most probably the reasons that left Brazil without a general data protection regulation until now are that, first, a strong consumer law uses to take care historically of several privacy issues when related to privacy. But there's the fact that data protection is not only consumer law, and data protection must and will go beyond the strict consumer rules that we have right now. The other thing, the other fact, the other reason that you can think of is that Brazil didn't have a strong use of adequacy according to European Union standards and rules, such as countries as Uruguay and Argentina had, that for economic, for social reasons. Brazil, yes, that could be interesting in some ways, but the use is not so strong as the one who pushed some countries to adopt a kind of strict data protection regulation, such as other Latin American countries. Considering so that there is a strong use for data protection regulation in Brazil, that consumer privacy cannot regulate the entirety of the problem right now, and that Marco Civil isn't a data protection law, because it's such a strict sectorial law which doesn't provide only for data protection. As Ronaldo Lemos said before, Brazilian Marco Civil has also data retention, which is in some ways the contrary of data protection. Currently, right now, we have 3 proposals of data protection regulation in Brazil. One, which is right now in the House of Representatives. The second, which is a bill which is in the Federal Senate right now, the bill 330, and then a draft bill which was disclosed last month by the Minister of Justice. One interesting fact is that all those 3 proposals share the same cultural roots, and they are based on the same basic text, which is a text which was used by the Minister of Justice in a public consultation the minister ran in 2010. The last version of the draft bill by the Minister of Justice is the result of 10 years of work, which began in some meetings inside Mercosul, the internal commercial bloc in the South America. The Minister of Justice ran 2 public consultations about the issue. Last was run between January and July of this year, and we gather more than 2,000 contributions from all over the world to shape the final version of our bill. In this sense, the draft bill insisted on the tradition started with Marco Civil of running public consultations, and I must say that we even went a bit beyond this, as the contributions for the public consultations went through a set of analytic tools developed ad hoc by Steel Web, a piece of Nick Berg, and the Federal University of Minas Gerais, in which, in a partnership with the Ministry of Justice, aimed to develop tools to improve the process of public consultations, analytics, and also of rulemaking in Brazil. The final text, just as Marco Civil, as it was told before, I believe has no winners, no clear winners. There are some concerns from the third sector, from the government, from the private sector, from academy, which were all relevant and were included in the law. We aim to have all sectors represented, but above all, create a draft which could protect citizens in the shape of information society, in the shape of their needs on the control of personal data, and also a bill, if not future-proof, which is possible, which is undesirable at the final stand, but at least a text which can adapt to the actual flux of information, to the actual dynamics of technology, and so on. In that sense, we created some rules based on principles. We try to integrate some experience from other countries, which we feel were important to take into account right now. And this bill was ultimately sent to the Presidency of the Republic, which will analyze the text and will hopefully soon send it to Congress. What it means that Brazil is aiming to regulate data protection now. First, it's very interesting that Brazil is trying to, in this effort, combine traditional data protection tools and instruments with the tradition of the Brazilian legal framework, which is successful in some extent to protect citizens and individuals, for instance, in the sense of consumer protection, using based on rules as the good faith principle and so on. That's for the internal reasons. I must add that we could have some external effects of our initiative, in the sense that Brazil, as one of the few big economies without data protection rules, can play a role on balancing international frameworks on data protection. It is very important because even if many people feel, even Professor Rodota and the United Nations Rapporteur, Professor Kanatash, are talking about the need for international instruments on data protections. The truth is that there's not an actual discussion of what is the basis of this kind of instrument that we start right now, even in IGF, but we're a bit maybe far, unfortunately, of this. So, considering that, it is very important to notice that Brazilian option on data protection regulation can count as very important in the global balance of data protection, in the global panorama of the protection of privacy, influencing other Latin American countries, maybe, and also influencing some balance in the world. And that's the message I would give. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was told that we have to kind of close up really quickly because there's another session, but I know there's some questions, so if they're very brief questions, could you please, or interventions? I know there's Diego De Laurentiis, the MP from Italy, who is here, who hasn't had a chance to talk, and I think he might want to say something. And then I see two hands, one here, one in the back there, Oreste Pollicino. I would, if you don't mind, I would give it to Oreste Pollicino first because you talked before. And let me tell you, everybody, that you're all invited to come tonight at the very big event that our Brazilian friends helped to organize, and we have been all invited to go to the CGI event organized with us and with ITS Rio, and it's going to be at the Hotel Tambaú at 7 p.m. And if you join us there, it would be wonderful because that's where we could also discuss things that we haven't discussed here, and there's going to be more speeches there and more time to talk about all this. Thank you. So where is Diego De Laurentiis? Is he here? Would he like to speak?
Okay, just a little question. I will ask how the Bill of Rights, not only the Italian one, can improve the direct democracy and the process of public involvement to the democratic process to choose and to improve the rights of the knowledge and to share the knowledge. So if you want to say something about this.
Okay, I will collect the questions and then I have everybody answer to all of them at once.
Yeah.
So Oreste Pollicino, your turn.
Yeah, I have a very short comment. I really enjoyed very much the comparative approach related to looking at Marco Civil and the Declaration of Fundamental Rights Italian. I would like to stress also a difference that could be, I think, of a significant relevance. The choice of the Marco Civil is to encapsulate the Marco Civil as a law that has a statutory law rank. So it's clearly a choice in which it encapsulates the legislation in the hierarchy of source of law. This was not the choice of the Declaration of Italian Fundamental Rights. It is just a source of inspiration. It is not a statutory law rank. I think this is a benefit for two reasons. The first is that being a statutory law rank, the risk is that a law that could be adopted later could, in a way, change the spirit of Marco Civil. I completely agree on the drafters of Marco Civil that one of the best challenge is to limit the executive. But in order to limit the executive, should be a law that is higher. Otherwise, the risk is not to limit in substance, but only in theory. On the other hand, the Italian Declaration of Fundamental Rights, being a source of inspiration, has not any risk to be obsolete, but on the other hand, it can look not just at the judge, but at the political actors. This, I think, is the second main element. Professor Rodotà said before, it is very important to balance the global dialogue among judges with the global dialogue among political actors. The risk of Marco Civil is to be interpreted mainly by judges. This means clearly a kind of amplification of judicial activism. On the other hand, the Declaration of Fundamental Rights in Italy, in internet, is not exactly done for being interpreted by judges because it's simply outside the source of law, but it's mainly a source of inspiration for parliament political actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oreste. And so basically the two big subjects are digital citizenship and digital democracy. How are these instruments like Bill of Rights or the Marco Civil law or eventually a constitution, how do they help and how do they help achieve digital democracy? And the other one is more on whether it's better to have a law or a constitution. Does it make sense for these to be laws? And who would like to answer here at the table? Or if non c'è tempo per altre domande. So who will have? Fabrizio Heda, would you like to answer to address some of the issues? No, okay. Paolo Coppola, would you like to address some of the issues that have been asked? I will ask all of you at the table.
Yeah, maybe I can say something about participation of people in the legislative process, and I think maybe we should improve our work in that aspect because maybe we didn't focus enough on this important aspect. But I just want to say something about the governance of the third layer, because I think that the problem about the governance of the third layer is that it is about the society, is about the belief, the values of people around the world. So I think that we are in a so early stage of the process because it's really difficult to find a common belief on that subject. But I want to see this process in another point of view, and I believe that the more we go on in the governance of the third layer, the more the governance of the world could benefit.
Would you like to answer?
Very short comment about these declarations and the legislations that is coming in the States. We have seen that there are three levels. One is the global level, and it is clear that in the global level is very difficult to legislate. So we have to start from best practices and trying to convince everyone that they agree on certain principles and so on. But we need also legislations in the countries. So this is, and maybe the third level is even regions, part of countries, let's say. So we have to be flexible about this and try to advance in all the three layers: regions, countries, global.
Thank you. Juan Carlos de Martin.
Just briefly, I agree that it's an important aspect, the one that regarding the possibility of using the internet for contributing to the political process and to a more participatory democracy. It's mentioned briefly in the preamble, and by the way, nobody mentioned the preamble. I recommend that you read the preamble to the declaration, because I think it's one of the finest parts of the declaration. It's mentioned there, and it is not really addressed that much apart from Article 14 at the end. It's an important component, and we have to do more work for that. But in that case, the question is more political, in the political sense, than rather than technical. We can use the internet for many things, for consultations, referenda, and so on. But the real issue we have to tackle is the role of participatory democracy in this current time and age.
Giovanna Domenico.
I think that there is a red through between the two questions, one posed by Diego De Lorenzi, the other posed by Pollicino. It's a question of democracy. It's clear that at this stage our declaration has no political, has no legal value, but if the motion will be approved, it begins to have a political value. And it can be, regardless its incorporation in a law, it can be a point of view for the judge. This is the link between the two questions, because it's if the judge take into consideration the Italian declaration, it's a democratic way to give value. But in an international treaty, because this play has an international field. Thanks.
Guido Doneta, would you like to add something?
Very briefly on the improvement of digital democracy, I believe that now we are beginning to feel the effects of running public consultations, analyzing them, translating them into law, but we are very far from having a precise measure of what its weight, in the sense that, at least in Brazil, we have 2,000, 3,000 comments and suggestions, whereas in US or India, in the net neutrality public consultation, the count went to the million And it's very important to generate reflections, to reflect on how these suggestions are being used, also in order not to distort the profile of the population. There are many people who are not entitled or have the cultural capacity to participate in consultations, and it must be done a very reflection. But anyway, the results until now are very important in the way they can make it more, they can legitimize some options the legislator takes.
Thank you. We are at finishing touches here, but I would really like to call Professor Stefano Rodotà for a conclusion remark. And yeah, let's please, Professor Rodotà, can you come here, and would you like to say something to end this session? And then we're all going to get together tonight.
The only conclusion in my mind is that this initiative has been very important, not only for celebrating what happened in Italy, but how can we improve our work after the declaration of, and the fact that the declaration is now a part of the Italian politics. And as has been stressed also by Giovanna De Minico, how can this kind of document could be used in the general discussion and in the discussion inside the judiciary. I said in my speech before that there is an encounter very important between courts and legal culture. Now the problem is if the legal culture about fundamental rights on internet can encounter politics. This is a very important point, and I think that I made reference to the judiciary because the main results have been had in last year through the intervention of international and national courts, reshaping beyond the national boundaries what internet is becoming, can be in the future. So I think that the same idea must be incorporated in the political approach on this point, because I think that we have until now a weak answer by politics, and generally speaking, and I go back to what I was saying before, what can happen at political level is not sure a positive fact. I am convinced that we need a very important attention paid by the public opinion, and this Internet Governance Forum can be a place where these worries can be expressed. This is an important point. We can accept a kind of war between judiciary and parliament, between judiciary and business. So it is very important to have, but the crucial point is, are we ready for accepting that fundamental rights are the starting point and fundamental priority inside the reshaping the legal environment of internet? This is the problem. And I thank very much Anna Macera for having organized this meeting, giving the opportunity to confront our point of view with an international audience. Thank you very much.
Normal workshop duration is 90 minutes, and I do think we would need more than 90 minutes. We may even need less than 90 minutes. And with that, I think I would start. I can introduce the panelists. On my very left is Neil Schwartzman. Next to me is Julie McConnell. McCain is a very long name. My apologies for getting that wrong all the time. Next to me is Bartil Natris, and on the very right is Bill Woodcock. Now, this is an offshoot of the Best Practice Forum on Unsolicited Communication. In the discussions, on the list discussions, we clearly identified a need for training and capacity building in developing countries. Unfortunately, we invited some African colleagues. In the end, were not able to make it, which
from the African region itself. We did a survey, albeit a small one, we only received 15 responses that were spread across Africa. We weren't just looking at one or two countries represented, and it was quite common to hear that training in these areas is something that is being sought. In the forum report, we also note, however, that training tools already exist, such as those that Morg and LAP released in 2015, earlier this year, through the best practice document, and that there's also training which Morg, for example, has put together. But we did acknowledge in our report that there are difficulties in tailoring training for audiences for a range of reasons, and these are not uncommon as new economies and cultures come online, and often things like cultural issues come into play. For example, in some cases, an inclination not to ask questions at the time of training because it may be viewed as discourteous. So listening to a trainer, taking it all in, and actually not taking it all in because one didn't actually ask what they should have at the time when they had the person in the room. Language issues. Most training materials have not been translated into local languages in the African region, and regrettably experts rarely have the requisite language skills to present in those native tongues. Lack of technical skills to learn, and financial issues, and I guess that's the point of this session. We were hoping to have a matchmaking session to talk about getting all those things together and help making that happen. We consider there is value in moving forward in doing that, even if it is incrementally, and this really was to facilitate a first step. Who will we pass over to next? Neil, did you want to talk about that recommendation?
Well, hi everybody, and thank you for attending. This is actually the part where we are, as we said, trying to, pardon me, matchmake. I've done some work in terms of trying to train people both in developing nations as well as developed nations. The need for understanding of some of the basic, the fundamental technologies, how the internet works. For example, every time a country passes a law, say an anti-spam law, for example, you have law enforcement agents, prosecutors, and judges who all need fundamental knowledge to be able to make an informed decision about a given case, whether or not they should be going forward with it, whether or not something could be easily forged. And I could blame Julia for a raft of nasty things with the appropriate amount of skill. And so being able to, I think, I don't want training to sound patronizing in any possible way, because it's as much a need in developing nations and developed nations and virtually every strata of civil society that deals with internet-related issues. So in that sense, there is, I think, a greater sense of urgency when it comes to developing nations, because as we were just having a little bull session earlier, Christian Dawson from the I2C coalition representing hosting providers, you know, it is painfully evident that if developing nations don't learn from our mistakes, they are going to pay for it in spades, because bad guys will take advantage of any lapses in best practice and everything else, and so we will end up pay for it with the countries and companies that are ill-equipped because they don't have the kind of economic facilities and resources that we have in the developed nations to throw at the issues. Take a look at Comcast or Gmail, Google. You know, their resources are virtually unlimited when it comes to fighting abuse. The same can't be said for a hosting company or an ISP anywhere in Africa, anywhere in South America, where it is a disproportionate amount of pain that they will suffer as a result of that. And so we are looking very much to try to advocate and instill some of these best practices in a way that is cost effective for both those that are offering them as well as those that are there to consume them. And so any ideas are more than welcome. It is not only about money, but it's also about how best to effectively communicate something in a cultural sense, linguistic sense. It's great. I can go and talk to everybody in English or French, but that doesn't mean that the information is getting appropriately imparted to those that wish to understand it. So that's about it.
For that, both Julia and Nick have actually drawn our attention to cultural and linguistic barriers, and this is something we encountered in various fields. Language issues is one issue, but there may also be cultural issues, and you pointed out that people from different cultures may actually be too shy to ask questions because they find it might be not appropriate or downright rude. And this is something we tend to overlook easily. We think, okay, when we dealt with the language, maybe interpretation and translation, things got dealt with, but we overlook the cultural sensitivities, the differences. I would have a question or comment with regards to the vocabulary. Neil, you said rightly, training is not supposed to mean condescending, but in development assistant, I have been out of that for a number of years, but we're talking of capacity building or capacity development rather than training. Now, I have not been so much of that discussion, but I just wonder whether it could also be rebranded. We all know what we mean with it, but this is also part of the cultural sensitivities. I find the same with the term education. That can also be sometimes be looked at as a little bit condescending. You know, we have to educate you and then you'll be fine. It is not meant that way, I'm aware, but again, we have to be cognizant of sensitivities. And meanwhile, we also have an additional panelist on our board, Thomas Lomanauskas from the ITU. I don't know who wants to go next. Bill, maybe? Or, yeah.
So I would echo a lot of what Neil has said. In addition to my role in the MOG Foundation board, my day job is with Packet Clearinghouse, and we teach a lot of workshops and have for some 21 years. I think there's some important things that Neil touched on. First is that people in developing countries don't have different problems than people in developed countries. they simply have less excess wealth to waste in the process of solving them, right? So they have to be more careful. They have to adhere more strictly to already proven solutions rather than, you know, trying 10 different things and hoping that one sticks without looking around to see what precedents might exist. I think, and it's, as you're saying, Marcus, there's a tendency to use terminology that makes it seem that people from developed countries have something or know something that people from developing countries don't. And I mean, it's very important to remember that, you know, people are equally smart regardless of where they're from. But one of the big problems in developing countries is because of the economic constraints, they have brain drain, right? So smart people in developing countries, they get the information and they go somewhere else to turn it into a career because the economy in their home country often won't support the kind of life that they aspire for their children, right? So I think a lot of this has to do with, I think a lot of the solution is in trying to make the applications for knowledge relevant in the developing countries, such that when people come to a workshop, when they learn something, their first thought is not, how do I monetize this by moving to Western Europe? I think helping people understand what they can do to solve the problem within their home context is really valuable. I think, as you said, there are cultural issues around conveying information and interactivity and so forth. And a lot of those are not they're geographic cultural issues. A lot of them are, I mean, what I often see is that when someone is in a workshop surrounded by the peers that they actually work with and interact with, they tend to clam up. They tend to not ask questions that might make them look foolish in front of their colleagues. Yet, if you put them in a group of people who they are in similar kinds of positions from all over the world, not their direct peers and colleagues in their same country, you know, the same people will ask questions that might seem foolish at first, but there aren't really foolish questions. Any good trainer can take, you know, the barest bones of a question and turn it into useful exposition, right? So, I don't know, those are just some of my thoughts on the issues that we thus far.
Thank you. Wout, you next. We were talking about the African survey. Maybe you could also say a few words about that you conducted.
My name is Wout Natris. I'm the UN consultant responsible for this best practice group on unsolicited communication. Let me take one step back and go back to the inception of the idea. Is that we were talking to people, and basically we're asking, what do you really need from this best practice forum before we had anything on paper? And the answer was training. And then we asked, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, the whole issue in developing nations came up, but the main point was it's in both our interest, and that's a point that's of course already being made, but it's in the interest of the West not to get millions of spam messages from developing nations, while developing nations have a severe interest in protecting their own people and their own customers. So in other words, there is a win-win, perhaps even a quick win in this situation. And one of the statistics we were able to dig out was that the number of high-speed internet connections, as soon as they come to place in developing nations, the number of unsolicited communications and other nefarious purposes go up much faster than the high-speed internet connections that come in. So in other words, that underscores what we're saying here is that actually things will happen much faster than they can put in the high-speed internet in developing nations. The criminals are noticing in what I've been told within 30 seconds. Put the light on, and within the minute they see the numbers of trouble shoot up in the West. So in other words, there is a double interest here. From there, it was, okay, what sort of organizations do we need to discuss this sort of topics with? Because we need to get over multiple problems here. We have to find the right people to train so that we not have the wrong people in the room. We need to find organizations that are willing to organize it. We need to find trainers, we need to find funding to get people into the room, etc., logistics, etc. So that's why we came up with this idea. For the day zero training, we got as much experts as possible. To come back to the IGF survey, we thought, okay, we really need input from people on the ground. And we came up with a survey we developed with IGF Africa together, which we had hoped to have on the table, but unfortunately they are on the plane at this point in time, so they could not be here. There's also an organization called the Global Forum of Cyber Expertise, which was launched in April in the Netherlands at the Global Conference on Cyberspace. They're also on the plane at this point in time, so they could not be here also for this meeting. But that's an organization which is looking for projects to actually implement, which they have the secretariat for, to take care of perhaps even issues like this. If that sort of organizations find each other, it could go under that umbrella. So this was the reason to invite them in the first place. They're having a special meeting somewhere on Wednesday, I think, introducing it to the IGF. So if you have the possibility to go and meet them, do so. I can't tell you the time at this point, I'm sorry. But the IGF, as said, the IGF Africa survey, gave us about 15 answers on the need for training, on several topics, on how is there law in your country, very basic questions. But what I understand is that the results were presented to IGF Africa itself, and it got some major acclaim. It was so recognizable for the people participating in Addis Ababa beginning of September that everybody was asking, can we please participate in the survey? But it had closed during no time with the deadlines moving up to open it up again. But the fact was that it was recognized as something important. And that what made us come up with when we met at the MAG about that the same day, the day after in Paris, that Marcus and I thought, okay, let's do something extra for the best practice forum and see if we can come up with a few recommendations we can put in the report. And that's basically why we are here, so that we can reflect it in the end result in December. And that's about what I have to say about it. So.
Thank you, Lars, and last but not least, Thomas. And you obviously represent an organization with a huge experience in the development area with TUD, and I'm sure you have lots of activities to report about. Please.
Thanks very much, Marcus. And, it is great indeed to be here, and it's my first speaking opportunity in this IGF already, you know, so it's like, and it's a great city to be here, and it's a great venue, you know, so it's, you know, for also to, mostly, you know, we have a few representatives of IGF Secretariat and friends here, so I already have to kind of congratulate you with this great event here. But to start with, I think a couple of things. First of all, I think I agree what also you say in your BP forum report document or draft paper, that, you know, it's not only about spam, it's a broader issue, and it's more and more broader issue. It's more difficult to distinguish these days where the spam finishes and where the broader security finishes. Start, you know, when we talk about malware, we talk about spear finishing and all that, you know, it's whether spam is the way to get into the networks, you know, and that's or spam is just not just loading on networks as it's traditionally before. So I think it is important to look at the spam in the broader issue in cybersecurity, and think more and more we from ITU perspective look at that, even though we have specific interests on spam, but we'll also kind of look at that as a broader issue. It's also, I like your point about that it's not about, you know, for me, how I interpret that, it's not about altruism, it's not about us helping to resolve someone else's problem, it's about all of us working together to resolve all of our problems, because, you know, it's, in the end of the day, you know, the big difference between cybersecurity and every, you know, any other, you know, form of technology that was before is that cyber can, it's very entry barriers are very low. That means that you can do attacks, you can do bad things from anywhere, and victims can be anywhere. That means we can only protect ourselves if we protect together, and we don't leave white spots. And our experience in ITU is, and the statistics that we collected, both on the, just the, for example, establishment of certs, but also on the other hand of we have a broader index, which you call Global Cybersecurity Index, still shows Africa as a white spot, as we say. So that means still the security level, cybersecurity level is not that developed, and that means it's not just a problem for Africa, it's a problem for everyone. At the same time, it's also, I'm about making one comment. You're correct. I now have to tell you about the voices relation about, looking around and saying, one of the rules when we have as ITU is like when we talk about some stakeholders, we have to have those stakeholders at the table, and sometimes not having these stakeholders is already, it already shows the problem, because looking around, maybe but I don't see many faces from the region, we're talking about. So that's the thing, and you say they will join us, and that's great, and I think there's responses, and African IGF was discussing that, but I think it's also important that we actually, it's not just about, and again, it shouldn't be about us to them, it shouldn't be about us providing capacity building, even this training, terminology is important, but I think it's more than terminology, it's about all of us working together to resolve the issues, and together with the stakeholders that are most affected, and that's at least from and then it's kind of plugging ITU angle here. For us, ITU is very important because we always say we are organization, member-driven organization, 193 countries, everyone is equal there, so everyone comes to the table to help each other together. So in that kind of area, I started my market plug. So we have certain activities in Africa that we'd like to highlight that hopefully could then be leveraged with activities of other stakeholders. For example, we do cybersecurity assessments, and we've done 27 so far in Africa, out of 65 in total. We implemented 7 certs in Africa out of 11 certs in total. We did 2 more in the pipeline for Burundi and Gambia. We did for overall, and we did in globally 11 cyber drills, including 100 countries. And latest cyber drill was in Africa, in Kigali, Rwanda, in May this year. And we did this year in February, the Regional Forum on Cybersecurity. Cybersecurity against in economic community of Central African states. And as well, we had some specific projects, for example, fully developed countries that again cover Africa. So we think, certain African countries. So I think there is a kind of pipeline of activities, but I think what's important there now, saying what stakeholders are not on the table, I have to say what stakeholders are at the table, and whether they're stakeholders who kind of share the same purpose, to build this cybersecurity culture, to increase the level of preparedness of everyone everywhere, and to make us all safer. And I think that's a great value of this venue as well. So we're putting our work on the table. We put our work at the table also in GFC, as you mentioned, Global Forum for Cybersecurity here. We also realize it's not enough for one organization to say we'll resolve it. No, we all need to work together if we want to make a dent in this problem. Thanks.